Today we got some more actual history from the period of the early days of the American Republic. This story is about a lame and wounded Indian who wandered up to someone's doorstep in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania in 1786. This was during a period from 1785 to 1795 called the Northwest Indian War. We will be reading from this book, Incidents of Border Life, illustrative of the times and conditions of the first settlements in parts of the middle and western states, comprising narratives of strange and thrilling adventures, accounts of battles, skirmishes, and personal encounters with the Indians, descriptions of their manners, customs, modes of warfare, treatment of prisoners, etc., etc. This book was published by Jospeh Pritts all the way back in 1838. I have not been able to find much information about the author Jospeh Pritts. In the preface he says that he was motivated to write this book by journeying with two clergymen to whom he told many stories of border warfare in the late 1700s that he had either heard or experienced firsthand. One of the clergymen asked him if there was a book where he could read all the stories from that time period. Jospeh Pritts could not think of such a book, so he spent the next several years of his life compiling all the stories and narratives he could of border warfare in states like Virginia, Pennsylvania, and Kentucky. So here is one very interesting tale from that book, called The Story of the Lame Indian. In Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, about the year 1786, one evening just at twilight, there was found sitting in a porch an Indian with a light pole in his hand. He spoke in broken English to the person of the house who first came out, and asked for milk. The person, a girl, ran in, and returning with the others of the family, they came to see who it was that had something like the appearance of a human skeleton. He was to the last degree emaciated, with scarcely a semblance of flesh and bones. One of his limbs had been wounded, and it had been on one foot and by the help of the pole that he had made his way to this place. Being questioned, he appeared too weak to give an account of himself, but asked for milk, which was given to him. The word was sent to the commanding officer of the garrison at that place, General William Irwin, who sent a guard and had him taken to the garrison. After having had food and being now able to give some account of himself, he was questioned by the interpreter, Joseph Nicholas. He related that he had been on the Beaver River trapping and had a difference with a Mingo Indian, who had shot him in the leg because he said he had wished to come to the white people. Being told that this was not credible, but that he must tell the truth, and that in so doing he would fare the better, he gave the following account, to wit, that he was one of a party which had struck the settlement in the last moon, attacked a fort, killed some, and took some prisoners. This appeared to be a fort known by the name of Walter's Fort, by the account which he gave, which is at the distance of 23 miles from the town on the Pennsylvania road towards Philadelphia, and within 8 miles of what is now Greensburg. He stated that it was where he received his wound. The fact was, the old man Walter and his daughter and 2 sons were at work in the field, having their guns at some distance, which they seized on the appearance of Indians, and made towards the fort. This was one of those stockades or blockhouses to which a few families of the neighborhood collected in times of danger, and going to their fields in the day returned at night to this place of security. These persons in the field were pursued by the Indians and the young woman taken. The old man with his sons kept up a fire as they retreated, and had got to the distance of about 150 yards from the fort when the old man fell. An Indian had got upon him and was about to take his scalp, when one in the fort, directing his rifle, fired upon the Indian, who gave a horrid yell and made off, limping on one foot. This was in fact the very Indian, as it now appeared, that had come to town. He confessed the fact and said that as he was being pursued, he had hid himself in the bushes a few yards from the path along which the people from the fort had come in pursuit of them. After the mischief was done, a party of our people had pursued the Indians to the Allegheny River, tracing their course, and had found the body of the young woman whom they had taken prisoner, but had tomahawked and then left. The Indian, as we have said, continuing his story to the interpreter, gave us to understand that he lay there 3 days without moving from the place where he first threw himself into the bushes, until a pursuit might be over, lest he should be tracked. That after this he had got along on his hands and feet, until he had found this pole in the marsh, which he had used to assist him, and in the meantime had lived on berries and roots, that he had come to a post some distance, and thought of giving himself up, and lay all day on a hill above the place, thinking whether he should or not. But seeing that all were militia men, and no regulars, he did not venture. The Indians well knew the distinction between regulars and militia, and from these last they expected no quarter. The post of which he spoke was about 12 miles from Pittsburgh on the Pennsylvania road, at the crossing of what is called Turtle Creek. It was now 38 days since the affair at Walter's Fort, and during that time this miserable man had subsisted on plants and roots, and had made his way on one foot by the help of this pole. According to his account, he had first attempted a course to his own country by crossing the Allegheny River a considerable distance above the town, but strength failing to accomplish this, he had wished to gain the garrison where the regular troops were, having been at this place before the war, and in fact he was now known to some of the garrison by the name of Davy. I saw this Indian in the garrison after his confession some days, and was struck with his endeavors to conciliate goodwill by smiling and affecting placability and a friendly disposition. The question now was what to do with him. From the mode of war carried on by the Indians, they are not entitled to the laws of nations, but are we not bound by the laws of nature to spare those that are in our power? And does not our right to put to death cease when an enemy ceases to have it in his power to injure us? This diable boiteau, or devil on two sticks as they may be called, his leg and his pole, would not seem to be likely to come to war again. In the meantime, the widow of the man who had been killed at Walter's Fort, and the mother of the young woman who had been taken prisoner and found tomahawked, accompanied by a deputation of the people of the settlements, came to the garrison, and addressing themselves to the commanding officer, demanded that the Indian should be delivered up, that it might be done with him as the widow and mother and relations of the deceased should think proper. After much deliberation, the country being greatly dissatisfied that he was spared, and a great clamor prevailing through the settlements, it was thought advisable to let them take him, and he was accordingly delivered up to the militia of the party which came to demand him. He was put upon a horse and carried off with a view to take him to the spot where the first mischief had been done, at Walter's Fort. But as they were carrying him along, his leg, the fracture of which by this time was almost healed, the surgeon of the garrison having attended to it, was broken again by a fall from the horse, which had happened some way in carrying him. The intention of the people was to summon a jury of the country and to try him, at least for the sake of form, but as they alleged, in order to ascertain whether he was the identical Indian that had been at the party at Walter's Fort, though it is not very probable that he would have had an impartial trial, there having been a considerable prejudice against him. The circumstance of being an Indian would have been sufficient to condemn him. The idea was, in case of a verdict against him, which seemed morally certain, to execute him, according to the Indian manner, by torture and burning. For the fate of Crawford and others was at this time in the minds of the people, and they thought retaliation a principle of natural justice. But while the jury were collecting, some time must elapse, that night at least, for he was brought to the fort or blockhouse in the evening. Accordingly, a strong guard was appointed to take care of him, while in the meantime one who had been deputed sheriff went to summon a jury, and others went to collect wood and materials for the burning, and to fix upon the place which was to be the identical spot where he had received his wound, while about to scalp the man whom he had shot in the field, just as he was raising the scalpeloo, twisting his hand in the hair of the head, and brandishing his scalping knife. It is presumed that the guard may be said to have been off their guard somewhat on account of the lameness of the prisoner, and the seeming impossibility that he could escape. But it so turned out that while engaged in conversation on the burning that was to take place, or by some other cause of inattention, he had been permitted to climb up to a remote corner of the blockhouse, get to the joints, and from thence upon the wall plate of the blockhouse, and from thence, as was supposed, to get down on the outside between the roof and the wall plates. For the blockhouse was so constructed that the roof overjutted the wall of the blockhouse, resting on the ends of the joists that protruded a foot or two beyond the wall, so that those within could fire down upon the Indians who should approach the house to set fire to it or attempt the door. But towards the morning the Indian was missed, and when the jury met there was no Indian to be brought before them. Search had been made by the guard everywhere. The jury joined in the search, and the militia went out in all directions in order to track his course and regain the prisoner. But no discovery could be made, and the guard were much to blame for their want of vigilance, though some suppose that he had been let go from feelings of humanity, that they might not be under the necessity of burning him. The search had been abandoned, but 3 days after this a lad looking for his horses saw an Indian with a pole or long stick just getting on one of them by the help of a log or trunk of a fallen tree. He had made a bridle of bark, as it appeared, which was on the horse's head, and with which, and his stick guiding the horse, he set off at a smart trot in a direction towards the frontier of the settlement. The boy was afraid to discover himself or reclaim his horse, but ran home and gave the alarm, on which a party in the course of the day was collected and started in pursuit of the Indian. They tracked the horse until it was dark, and were then obliged to lie by. In the morning, taking it again, they tracked the horse as before, but found the course varied, taking into branches of streams to prevent pursuit, and which greatly delayed them, requiring considerable time to trace the stream, and find where the horse had taken the bank and come out, sometimes taking along hard ridges, though not directly in his course, where the tracks of the horse could not be seen. In this manner he had gotten on to the Allegheny River, where they found the horse with the bark bridle, and where he appeared to have been left but a short time before. The sweat was scarcely dry upon his sides, for the weather was warm, and he appeared to have been ridden hard. The distance he had come was about 90 miles. It was presumed the Indian had swam the river into the uninhabited and what was then called the Indian country, where it was unsafe for the small party that were in pursuit to follow. After the war, I took some pains to inform myself whether he had made his way good to the Indian towns, the nearest of which was Sandusky, at the distance of about 200 miles, but it appeared that after all his efforts he had been unsuccessful, and had not reached home. He had likely been drowned in the river or famished in the woods, or his broken limb had occasioned his death. So that's it for this episode. This was one of the incidents of border life that Jospeh Pritts included in his 1838 book. It is unclear if Pritts was the author of this narrative. More likely it was written by someone else, perhaps a soldier of the garrison at that time. Pritts mentions in the preface that his goal in writing this book was to preserve the original accounts of the people who lived during this time. He considered writing a long narrative combining all these incidents together, but instead he decided to publish them as incidents in the detached pieces that he found them. He viewed this as one of the chief merits of his work. There was also a reference to Colonel Crawford in this story. He was burned at the stake in the town of Sandusky in June of 1782. Crawford had led a regiment of about 500 men to try to attack the town by surprise, but they were unsuccessful, and he was captured while trying to retreat. He was burned at the stake in retaliation for the Gnadenhutten massacre that had occurred in March of 1782, where the Pennsylvania militia killed 96 pacifist Moravian Christian Indians. So the widow and mother of the victims of the attack on Fort Walter were planning on adding another round of revenge by burning this wounded Indian at the stake, but he escaped either by climbing out of the blockhouse or by being led out by a sympathetic guard, who was perhaps disturbed at what they planned to do to this Indian. This channel is called Unworthy History because we talk about actual history that is now deemed unworthy to be shown on history channels on TV. Stay tuned to this channel for more actual history directly from old books. If you'd like to help keep this unworthy history alive, then consider joining our Patreon page. Your name will be listed at the end of each episode. So if you want to see more episodes like this, then be sure to like and subscribe, and we'll see you next time on Unworthy History.